The Prime Minister having met with President Zelenskyy, remember in just a short while he will be arriving back in India as he takes that flight from Kyiv. I'm also being joined by a number of Ukrainian voices. Let's keep our focus on what Ukraine at this point of time expects from India, even as Prime Minister Narendra Modi becomes the first Indian head of state to ever arrive in Ukraine and meet with the Ukrainian head of state. Joining me on the telecast is Ben Aris. He's the editor-in-chief of BNE and the former Moscow bureau chief Daily Telegraph. Joining me on the telecast. In fact, let's hear it from, first of all, the Russian perspective amidst these developments that have taken place, and these are historic. These are being played out across all media channels in the entire world. And thank you, Ben, for joining me on the telecast. And let's hear it from you about how do you view the situation, which is Ukrainians speaking diametrically opposite to what Russia and India have been involved in terms of bilateral ties, in terms of trade ties, and how this continues to be a problem for Ukraine in India's stance in a bid to find any solution whatsoever in the Ukraine-Russia war?
Well, I think the Kremlin are not going to be entirely happy about it, but I think at the same time they're going to accept it because they're very pragmatic, and they've realized that, you know, there's this Western coalition that are trying to sanction and bring Russia to its knees. And it's not working very well. And that's because Putin's plan is to appeal to the rest of the world, the developing world, the global south, if you like, and then do business with them. And that's done on a pragmatic basis. It's not like that he's trying to form as tight a coalition as we see amongst the Western allies. That it's more of based on trade and arms deals, and they're going to look more at India's actions than they are at the rhetoric. As you know, that Modi was in Moscow in July, and he spent 2 days there. And it was an action-packed agenda. They met with a whole bunch of companies. There was negotiations on long-term oil supplies to India. There were negotiations on fertilizer. There was a big discussion about arms that Russia is supposed to be supplying India with this advanced S-400 missile system. And if you look at today's meeting, Modi is in Kyiv, but he's only there for a few hours, basically a photo op, you know, to shake Zelensky's hand, call for peace. And it's about positioning. I think that Modi is trying to put himself in the middle as a potential mediator, that he doesn't like this war, he doesn't want the war, he's not being dragged into the conflict in the East-West divide, he's sitting squarely in the middle. At the same time, he's kept his distance from China and Russia. They've both been much more aggressive. They set up the BRICS organization, which was designed, they hoped, to be a political opponent to the G7 plus that they're facing. Whereas Modi's concentrated much more on the G20, which is a similar non-Western alignment, but that is much more economics focused. And I think that sums it up. He's acting in India's best interests, and he agrees with Putin and Kyiv that, you know, the unipolar world that's dominated by the US is a bad idea. But he doesn't agree with Xi Jinping and Putin that we need to, you know, fight, to go to war over this issue, to clash, because we have similar tensions in South China Sea between China and the States, and that he would rather see the world integrate and that promote India by economics to sit at top table in geopolitics, and that's his goal. So today is really all about is to say the damage that he did by going to see Putin, and he needs to offset that by going to see Zelenskyy to show that he's in the middle.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Let's also hear it from another Russian voice. I have with me Ksenia Kondratyeva. She's a Russian journalist. Thank you for joining me on the telecast. And please tell me, how do you view the current set of events that are unrolling? First, the Prime Minister visiting Poland, and now he is in Kyiv. How does this impact India-Russia relations?
Thank you for having me, first of all. A month back, I've covered Mr. Modi's visit to Moscow very extensively. And what we can see today, as my previous colleague has said, I wouldn't agree that this is a photo op. I think Mr. Modi has plenty of other things to do rather than photo ops. I think India is sending a message to the world. So India's official stand on Ukraine has been there should be diplomacy, and diplomacy should involve both parties at war. Something that has been totally dismissed by the Western world and the Western supporters of Ukraine, because whatever peace initiatives that have been taking place so far, apart from the Turkish one, of course, in the very first year of the conflict, where Russia and Ukraine actually sat at the negotiation table, but then I guess the Western supporters of Ukraine decided, no, that's not going to be that easy. Anyways, so yeah, it is trying to show the world that both parties have to talk, and somebody has to build those bridges, because if you rightly remember, Mr. Modi is one of few global leaders who actually visited both capitals, Kyiv and Moscow. And how many Western leaders have come to Kyiv in the past 2.5 years? Some of them visited several times, but they have never come down to Moscow and try to hear out the Moscow perspective. So this is the message. That's why the visit is important. The rest is just optics, as many colleagues in India like to say. The optics may not work in favor of Russia necessarily, but that's a different game altogether. The kind of information war that is happening alongside the actual war never worked in favor of Russia. That's understandable. But what is important, that when Mr. Modi today was visiting the memorials, including the one for the children who died in the conflict, we get, I guess, the international audience gets the message of Russia being an aggressor. But I have visited funerals of a 9-year-old girl that died during a HIMARS attack of Ukraine on Donetsk. Children are dying both sides, people are dying both sides, and I think that has to be understood by the international community. The fact that while visiting Moscow, Mr. Modi didn't go to any such memorials doesn't mean that he, first of all, doesn't understand how impactful the conflict is on both sides, and of course globally, but for different reasons.
Okay, all right. Let's also get in an Indian perspective. Also joining me on the telecast is Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev. Ambassador Sachdev, a tightrope that is seemingly being walked by India. Do you think India needs to be perturbed in the kind of criticism it has faced in the past from Ukraine and United States of America in aligning and allying with Russia?
Thank you for having me. I think it's not an easy job to second guess what Prime Minister Modi has already said in so many words since morning in Kyiv, but I'll give my 2 pence bit. I believe that India has tried with certain elegance to be consistent in its position on Ukraine war. On one hand, initially, our External Affairs Minister rebuked the West for believing that crisis in Europe is global crisis, while crisis elsewhere are local issues. This was a position that was accepted grudgingly, and we put the Ukraine-Russia war in its own perspective, regional perspective. It's not a global war as such. It has an impact on the globe. Second issue here, I would like to agree with the first speaker about Prime Minister's action being more important than the rhetoric. We have seen this morning's report by Reuters that Russia now has India as its largest client for crude oil, surpassing People's Republic of China, where consumption of crude is going down. So we have 43% of our crude coming from Russia, which is a record figure. So actions speak for itself. Thirdly, I would like to say that we have been consistent and sincere. By going to Kyiv, we've done something to dispel India's cynicism, etc., that was alleged to by some quarters in the West, that we are benefiting from cheaper crude, cheaper raw materials from Russia, and we don't care for the war losses and humanitarian crisis being generated. By going to Kyiv almost on its own, if you allow Poland as a staging post, is something very important. It is not entirely an optics exercise. The agreements being signed, the offer of humanitarian assistance particularly, and offer of helping in reconstruction of Ukraine after the war, etc., speak for itself. I think it is wise of Prime Minister Modi not to wade into specifics of the peacemaking, the conditions, etc. Remember last year when China offered a 15-point program for bringing peace to the conflict. It tied itself into various loops, and it was a disaster doomed to fail. It's better to have those conditions discussed in private conversations by both sides, with both sides as well, before going public. I would like to address the issues about mediation. I think mediation has been tried by likes of Turkey's president, Hungary's prime minister, China's president, etc., etc., and these have not come to fruition. The situation has evolved slightly since the beginning of the month, with Ukraine now occupying 2,000 kilometers of Russian territory. So there's a quid pro quo possible in any peace negotiations. And when the two sides realize that they have more to lose by this war of attrition than to gain by it, and no clear-cut solutions are possible on the battlefield, people like Prime Minister Modi become relevant to talk to. I would also like to say that the two sides, Kyiv and Moscow, have had some modicum of understanding over gas flows, over nuclear safety, over many other things, despite very bitter and bloody conflict. Now is the time to build upon those understandings by exchanging of prisoners, civilians, and expanding the envelope of that limited understanding to more humanitarian issues, like not bombing energy or civil infrastructure, etc., etc.
Okay.
I think that is what Prime Minister might be trying to sort of push in Kyiv.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, sir. Let me get back, Ben, into the discussion, and let's try to understand, sequence of events that took place. In July, Prime Minister was in Moscow. There was a very critical stance taken by Ukraine and United States of America for the visit that was made by Prime Minister. However, we are yet to see any reaction whatsoever from Russia or President Putin. Would this be on expected lines of Russia respecting India's position and decisions?
Yeah, I think there is. I doubt that the Kremlin might say some mild things in rebuke for this visit, but the Ukrainian reaction to Modi in Moscow was really strong, particularly this famous hug that Modi gave to Putin, and I think Zelenskyy was calling it, why are you hugging a mass murderer or something along those lines. I doubt that the Kremlin will respond to this in the same way. They're much more sensitive to it. And as the ambassador mentioned, the oil business is significant. 43% of India's oil imports are now coming from Russia. Before the war, it was like less than 1%. I mean, there was no trade, and suddenly there's this enormous trade. And that's key to India's security. And moreover, it's a very, very profitable business too, in so much as that Russia's been forced to offer discounts to the international markets. And it changes somewhere between 5 and 15%. And of course, what that does for the refining business is the margins on the refining business has gone up tenfold as a result. And India's then exporting that oil products to the rest of the world. And it's also necessary, it relies on Russia for things like fertilizers, metals, other raw materials, nuclear technology transfer is another key thing. And I think the Kremlin understands full well that Modi has to go to Kyiv in order to show that he's playing both sides, that he's not partisan in this. But at the same time, the commercial interests are completely clear, and the Kremlin will be focused on that part, the fact that they have deals, the fact that those deals bind India to Russia to some extent, because it needs those deals. And in that sense, Ukraine has almost nothing to offer India. And so the Kremlin will just take it as part of the normal diplomatic fencing that goes on, the show that people put up in terms of rhetoric. And actually, it's going to look at the practical implications. If Modi comes away from Ukraine with an agreement to send it lots of weapons or something like that, then that would be a different kettle of fish. But I very much doubt anything like that is going to appear.
Ksenia Kondratieva, how do you view the situation here now? Now, after the visit completes, the Prime Minister returns to India. Are there any tangible changes that could be witnessed, and this particularly the expectation of Zelenskyy and of Ukraine that India needs to take some hard stance?
Yeah, everyone is 2.5 years into the conflict. The West and Ukraine, wants India to take a stand. India has taken a clear stand. It will, do whatever in its interest. That's one thing. And I think Mr. Modi stated in the past 3 days, dozens of times that India is for peace. So these are two important points. I don't know what other stand, just a few minutes back during the briefing with Mr. Jaishankar, a BBC journalist again asked, kind of on which side you are. It's really amazing. I think India has been very, very clear that it's on the side of peace. Now, whether we should expect any changes, I must say, unfortunately, I doubt so. I don't know what has to happen so that we see the changes, on the battleground, so that hostilities stop, because nothing so far has led to end to the hostilities and to some fruitful negotiations. Now, you have asked the questions about how Russia would react and how Russia sees this visit. Some of the experts have suggested that Mr. Modi discussed this possible visit to Ukraine with Mr. Putin when he was in Moscow. It is very much possible. See, the relationship between Russia and India and the entire Western, camp is very different. Russia has never Russia would never react in such a way as, for example, Mr. Zelenskyy reacted to a hug. And again, Mr. Jaishankar just a few minutes back clarified to the foreign media in Kyiv that it's a kind of a question of perception in different cultures. It's fine to hug anyone. That's a courtesy. That's what people do. So there is nothing like a hugging diplomacy or anything like that. Mr. Modi hugged Mr. Zelenskyy just today morning, and nobody in Moscow gonna react or say it was a huge disappointment like Ukraine reacted a month back. So I don't think this impacts in any way Russia-India ties, because they are very substantive. It's not just oil trade. Yes, it has. The oil trade has gone up in the past 2 years, but there's a lot more. There's a lot more in defense. There's a lot more in technology and so on. So this visit just, not going to have any negative impact. Rather, it's a good plus point for India's foreign policy. India is becoming more and more stronger player, and that's how we see it.
Okay. Ambassador Sachdev, again, a huge contrast in the way Russia sees its association with China versus Ukraine, which has grievances galore when it comes to India and its position on the Ukraine-Russia war. Can we at this point maybe assume or come to the conclusion that there's some ice that has broken, some ice that has thawed in this relationship between Prime Minister Modi and President Zelenskyy? There is yet a press statement that is to be released by the Ukrainian government after the meeting has gotten over.
I think we would have to see the fine print of the joint communique. Perhaps it's being issued at the conclusion of the visit later today to precisely reply to your questions. I suspect it would have plenty of goody-goody things without being so precise. But on the precise side, let me tell you that trade with Ukraine is quite substantive. In the financial year 22-23, we had trade of about $6 billion, and it was 4-1 in Ukraine's favor, with a lot of Ukrainian sunflower oil and other agricultural products coming to India. So Ukraine has an interest. There used to be thousands of medical students in Ukraine from India, and Ukraine tended to benefit from them. The negative perception that were created by some inapt remarks need to be seen in the context. Ukraine is quite frustrated with the lack of international support as it perceives it, and any gesture towards Moscow, in Moscow, is seen as a zero-sum game. You are either with us or with them. I think India rejects this kind of clarification, this kind of classification, and by going to Kyiv and doing precisely the same hug as was criticized by Mr. Zelenskyy, we have shown to him that we are brave and we are consistent, and we do not have any hidden agenda to do in Ukraine one way or the other. So this, I think, is a great plus. Ukraine would have reasons to feel assuaged. It would have reasons to feel that it has sort of moderated India's position on the crisis, as I believe I expect it to perceive. At the same time, whether the global South's voice conveyed to Ukraine would allow it to come down from obduracy and winner takes it all kind of consideration, going back to pre-2014 borders, etc., etc. It's a complex issue, and I think sooner or later Ukraine would and Russia both would have to sit on the table, particularly if United States elections go in a different way as it's being perceived. Thank you.
Okay, all right. I'm out of time. I thank all of you for joining me on the telecast, and thank you for my Russian guests for putting in their point of view in wake of this big historic development that has taken place and is at this point of time the focus of the entire world.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.